So hello and welcome friends. My name is Smita Nambishan and I lead the Salesforce user group in Trivandrum. My friends Parvati Prabhash and Meera Nair co-lead the Trivandrum developer group. Today we have a very special guest, someone who has a ton of experience running and leading agile projects in Salesforce. So she's also personally a great friend and mentor. And please, I'm sure all of you, whether you're beginners or intermediate level or experts in agile, you'll all have a very good takeaway from the session. So I'm not going to take too much time. I just want to say that please post any questions you have in the chat window, so that I will be happy to answer them at the end of the session. And do stay tuned for our Scrum special quiz at the end. Over to you, Sudha.
Thank you, Smita. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Smita, Meera, and Parvati for having me here to speak at the Trivandrum user group. And thank you, everyone, for taking time on your Monday morning to be here for this session. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Sudha Sundaram. Most of you would have known me here at Trivandrum. So I have 12 plus years of experience predominantly in the Salesforce and the Agile world. In my last position, I was Vice President Program Management Lead at Citi. I have experience coaching several organizations in their Agile journey. I'm also a certified professional. I also hold 11 Salesforce.com certifications, which include Application Architect. I'm also a co-founder of Salesforce Couple. Here are my LinkedIn and Twitter handles and my website link as well. If you would like to follow me, please feel free to. So in today's session, I'm planning to cover a few items predominantly in the Agile and the Salesforce world, right? So I'm going to talk about what Waterfall versus Agile is. So when do we use Waterfall and when do we use Agile? Pretty much a deep introduction into what Scrum is, what Scrum as a framework is, what Scrum Roles are, what Scrum Ceremonies are. And we're going to talk about the crux of our show today, which is when Salesforce met Agile. And moving on, I would talk a little bit about user story writing, prioritization, and estimation with very specific scenarios of Salesforce. So before I get started, I would like to hear from you all. What does Agile mean to you? So when I say the word Agile, what comes to your mind? Can you just take a minute to put it out on the chat? So there is no right or wrong answer. You can key in whatever you feel like. So think of Agile and tell me what it means to you. All right, I'm seeing flexible, fast and efficient, regular follow-up of the project, change, pretty interesting, able to move quickly, iterative approach, incremental development, quick and flexible, project management, customer expectations for a fast pace, development and testing at the same time. Any other thoughts here? Adaptable, software development lifecycle, delivering small pieces instead of whole product. Awesome. Thank you for taking time to tell me what Agile means to you. So Agile is not a mere methodology, right? Agile is a mindset. So I keep saying this to a lot of people that it's not about doing Agile, it's about being Agile, because Agile is a mindset shift from how we do the traditional project delivery. So it's basically a culture that we implement across the company. It's a complete mind shift from the traditional way we had been delivering products all along. So it is technically a mindset wherein we welcome different perspective and diversity of thoughts and ideas. We learn from our past mistakes and we try to improve. We learn to accept changes and adapt quickly. Our teams are pretty transparent, be it success or challenges or failures, we openly talk about it and we are self-managing. Our teams continuously communicate, collaborate, and share knowledge freely. And most importantly, our teams are happy and having fun at work, and the work pace is sustainable. So no one is either overloaded or no one is like, free without doing any work. So this entire mindset shift is what Agile is primarily about. And with this mind shift change, what we are able to achieve is to deliver high business value incrementally, sooner and faster. Like many of you rightly said, we keep delivering incremental and sooner and faster in small iterations, right? With high quality and a safer delivery. So when I say high quality, safer delivery, I mean a delivery that is smooth without like bigger shocks for us in the production. We don't build something and finally it's like a shock to the customer, it's shock to the user, and not the shock to the development team. So we are able to also innovate as we progress and deliver satisfactory products, incorporating consistent feedbacks, which is again the crux of Agile, right? So we keep getting feedbacks as we move, and we try to incorporate that feedback to the cycle. It is also very important that through this process, the teams are really happy. They're having fun at work. They're able to work with each other. They respect each other. They collaborate with each other. They communicate freely. They share knowledge. So end of the day, the teams are happy, and it's sustainable through the process for us. And with all this, the end of the day, the happy customers, right? So we are all working towards making our customers happy. The product that we give makes our customers happy. So that is a crux of what Agile means. And thank you for all the amazing inputs. You pretty much covered what I wanted to, and I just had to summarize this. So moving on, right? So there is no one size fits all. What fits my need might not fit yours. So the traditional waterfall methodology can still be a fit for many programs depending on their conditions and parameters. So I'm not here in this session to say only Agile works. Waterfall might also work for some programs, while Agile could be great for others. So now let us just take a quick look at this with an example, right? So say we are renovating a kitchen. So this is what our use case today is. So let us see, when do we adapt Agile and when do we adopt Waterfall, and how do we go about renovating this kitchen? Say I exactly know which appliances I need in my kitchen, right? So I exactly know the brand, the dimensions, the pattern I want, and I have already decided the colors of my cabinets, cooktops, shelves, my wall, and also my budget is fixed. So now what happens is my work is very predictable. I exactly know what I need, and my outcome is already very clear and known. And say my design agent or the renovation agent has given me an estimate for this renovation. And he has also told me that it might take 3 months to complete this entire kitchen renovation, right? And I say, I'm fine with taking this 3 months. I'm okay not using my kitchen for 3 months. So this typically fits very well with Waterfall, right? It operates in phases. So if you see here, we have requirements phase, design, implementation, verification, deployment, and maintenance. So this is how the waterfall works. So the requirements are logged at the end of requirements phase, and then we go to the design, and the design gets logged at the end of design phase, and so on, right? So what happens here is the changes are very hard to be incorporated in the middle of this, because after each phase, we are having a sign off and we lock the requirements, we lock the design. So how do we go ahead and incorporate changes, right? It's really hard. So there is a very limited room for me to, incorporate innovation or learning here, right? So it's not easy to incorporate feedbacks through the cycle. So what happens after 3 months if I'm not happy with an appliance or a color, or I feel, oh, I should have done this differently. I should have had a longer slab. I should have painted my wall in a different color. So it is hard for me to change that because it's going to take me extra time. I've already lost 3 months. I'm not happy at the end of 3 months, but I need extra time and budget to incorporate my changes. So it may leave me a little bit disappointed, right? But if I don't have any of this, right? If I'm happy exactly with the outcome, then I'm good. So the waterfall works perfect for me, and I didn't have to use my kitchen for 3 months. So when do we do this the agile way? Say I want to renovate my kitchen iteratively, right? So I do not want to wait for 3 months. I want to start using my kitchen as soon as a part of it is built. And I have my MVP clear, meaning my minimum viable product. So I know what exact priorities I have. I also want to provide consistent feedback, and I want to ensure there are innovations as part of my things getting built. So say for instance, right, I want my cooktop with the chimney to be ready first so that I can start cooking. Then I want my refrigerator so I can store my vegetables, milk. And the next critical item for me is my sink so that I can wash my dishes, and my slab, and followed by my cabinet, and finally my shelves. So while I start cooking, right, and I notice that I may need a longer slab because the space is not enough, I may need to have a longer slab for my day-to-day work, I can always incorporate it in the agile way. So if I feel I would love to have a nice wallpaper, which may make my kitchen even more beautiful, I can always ask my designer to add it to the list of items. So through Agile, we can accommodate new ideas and learnings, which will certainly make me very happy with the end result. And not to forget, I get to use my kitchen through this process as and when an item is ready. So I get to use my cooktop and start cooking right after my first sprint because my cooktop is first ready with my chimney. So I don't have to wait for my refrigerator or my sink or my shelves to start using my cooktop. So this is typically when we would use, Agile for this particular example of renovating my kitchen. So moving on, we know there's a variety of different approaches or framework based on the Agile values and principles, which has been set out in the Agile Manifesto, right? So you would have heard about Scrum, you would have heard about extreme programming, you would have heard about crystal methods, SAFe, and many more. Again, there is no one size fits all. So we choose these frameworks based on many factors, based on the customers, factors and how they want to do the program. Again, in today's session, we will focus primarily on the most successful and a widely used Agile framework, which is Scrum. So just to give you a little bit overview before we start getting into details of Scrum is, so Scrum was founded on empiricism and the lean thinking. So which means that we believe that knowledge comes from experience and we make decisions based on what we observe. And technically, lean thinking eliminates waste and focus only on what is important. We're not going to waste time thinking about what is not so important, right? So Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. So what it does is it employs an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability, and it controls risks. It emphasizes on transparency in communication. Like I mentioned, whether it is success, whether it is challenges, whether it is failures, we all openly talk to each other and figure out a way out of it. And we create an environment of collective accountability and continuous progress. So no one here is an order taker. Nobody says like, hey, you go and do this task, or hey, you go and pick this user story. So we as a team are self-managing. So we decide what do we pick, how do we do, how do we get through it, right? So it's all about the teams being self-managing. So Scrum engages a group of such people who collectively have all the skills and expertise to do the work and share or acquire such skills. So typically in our Salesforce programs, we have the team with architect skill sets who are very good at design. We have some consultants, we have developers, we have testers. So these are like skill sets, right? It's not technically a developer or a tester or an architect. So the team comprises of all these different skill sets, people having different skill sets to make the program successful. So the three pillars of Scrum are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So you would keep hearing this term if you're in any Scrum programs, right? So like I mentioned, transparency is very important for communication in the team. And we kind of inspect and adapt as we move through the program. So we are able to learn from our success, we are able to learn from our failures, we are able to adapt through the program. So the success of the Scrum primarily depends on people becoming more proficient and living its 5 values. So here I've listed the 5 values: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. So what does that even mean, right? So when we say commitment, we are saying commitment to achieve goals and support each other. So we have various goals through a program, right? So we have a product backlog. There is a product goal for which the product backlog is put forward to. And once we have a sprint backlog, we are trying to achieve the sprint goal. So we have different goals as we move through the program. Like we have a definition of done, saying that my, whatever I'm building is done only if a set of criteria are matched, right? So only if my acceptance criteria is met, only if my code reviews are done, whatever, right? So we have different definitions of done for different programs. So the commitment ensures that we, committed to achieve goals, and we are supporting each other as a team as we progress. And when I say focus, it means focus on the work of the sprint to make the best possible progress. So as a team, we try to focus on the work in hand, and we try to progress with our best potential possible. And when I say openness, it means we are being open about work and challenges. So again, transparency comes again here, right? So we're trying to be open about all our successes, all our challenges, all our failures. And we try to, as a team, we try to figure out the solution for it. And next one is respect, which is very important, because through this program, we're working as a team, right? We need to have mutual respect for each other. So we respect each other, we support each other, we do this work as a team. And finally, courage. So courage is also equally important, because we need the courage to do the right thing and to be able to work on tough problems. So these 5 values are very important and is core of Scrum along with its 3 pillars. So now let us go ahead and see our Scrum squad, right? So we have different people working as part of our program. So we have a product owner, we have a Scrum Master, we have the developers or the team members, right? And the stakeholders, the users. So all this comprises, like Scrum team, when I say Scrum team, it comprises of a product owner, Scrum Master, and the developers. So they're typically a team of 10 or fewer. They together work towards achieving the product goal. So typically when I say product owner, so the product owner is responsible for the product backlog and prioritization. So product backlog is nothing but a bucket of user stories or your epics or features, right? So all your requirements are part of your product backlog. So basically the vision from your executives and stakeholders and what they want for the product goal is being captured as product backlog items. So this activity is typically done by the product owner, and the product owner is also responsible for prioritization of these product backlog items. And also the product owner's responsibility is to ensure the entire team understands what the product backlog items are. So all the questions are clarified. If someone has a question about a user story, the product owner has to ensure all the necessary details have been identified and provided so that the team can work on it. Product owner is also responsible for maximizing the value of the product. Again, this is in conjunction with the effort of the team, but product owner is primarily responsible for maximizing the product's value. Moving on with the Scrum Master. So Scrum Master is also called as a true leader. It used to be called as a servant leader. There are certain changes that happened with the Scrum guide based on, again, as we inspected and adapted all these here, how the Scrum engagements happen. The Scrum guide also went through a revision, and they said Scrum Masters are not really a servant leader, they are like true leaders. So they serve the Scrum team and the larger organization. So when I say larger organization, it means the executives, the stakeholders, the end users, whoever your stakeholders are. And the Scrum Master also ensures the Scrum is adopted well. So everyone understands what Scrum is, what Scrum roles are, what the Scrum ceremonies are. And he or she also ensures the coaching and mentoring on Scrum takes care. So if there's anyone who has any questions about how Scrum has to be adopted, if you feel something is not going correctly, if you feel a sprint planning is not actually towards this goal, you feel something is not happening correct, your person to go is a Scrum Master. He or she will help you mentor and coach on exactly how it should be done. Scrum Master also facilitates all the ceremonies. So when I say ceremonies, it means the Scrum events. So all your sprint planning to the daily Scrum to your sprint reviews and retrospectives, they're all called as the Scrum events or the Scrum ceremonies. Scrum Master is also responsible for removing any impediments for delivering the committed products. So if anyone in the team faces any impediments to achieve the product goal, right? If you're stuck anywhere, you foresee any risk, there is some dependencies which is not coming through along, again, your person to go to for as a Scrum Master. So Scrum Master's responsibility to remove impediments so that the team is able to deliver the committed product. So the next main where most of us belong to would be the developers. So they are called developers, but they don't technically mean just the development works. So developers can have different skill set. So people with skill set of testing, people with skill set of designing or architect, all these different skill sets can be part of the developers groups and also the developers themselves, right? So this team and potentially is responsible for delivering the potentially shippable increments of done. So which means we are going to deliver some increment at end of each sprint, a set of user stories, a set of items to which is towards the product goal. So this team is primarily responsible for that. So we are going to be working, developing it, testing it, doing anything else that are needed for it, like any research, any analysis. So we are going to ensure that we deliver this particular increment as part of the sprint. Also, the team is self-managing. When I say self-managing, what I technically mean is we choose who, how, and what to work on. So if there are 5 people in the developer team, right? So we are trying to say, I will pick my skill set ensures that I pick a particular user story because maybe it involves developing some business process and I've done this in the past. I have good experience in that. I can go ahead and pick the story for myself. And I decide how do I go ahead and break them into tasks and how do I achieve this particular story. So each person picks what they want to work on and they decide how they work on, right? And who is going to do it, right? They pick themselves to do that particular work. So this is very important because we are not order takers. Scrum is totally not about that. So if you're following Scrum methodology or you're being agile, it doesn't mean that a Scrum Master or a product owner comes and tell you, Smitha, you go and take this particular story, or Sudha, you go and pick this story. Wherein like Smitha or Meera or Sudha are going to pick our own user stories based on our skill set, and we are going to decide how do we go ahead and achieve this. And also the team is cross-functional. So imagine you have different products part of your programs, right? So there could be Salesforce, there could be SAP, or even within Salesforce, there could be Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, there are different products. So we can have a cross-functional team in order to achieve the overall product goal, who are experts in different functions or products. So moving on, most of you would have seen this a lot of times. This is the typical Scrum framework. And I've added a few items here, which are again part of the Scrum Guide 2020. I'm going to highlight it as I walk you through this. So everything starts by getting the inputs or vision from your executive team, stakeholders, customers, and users, right? So all this, first, the product owner sits with the team of executive stakeholders, end customers or end user, and tries to get their entire vision and what is their goal? What are they trying to achieve as part of this particular program? What is the end product that they want? So here is what product backlog comes, right? So product backlog contains a list of your requirements. So when I say requirements in agile terms, now we are going to break them down into epics, features, and user stories. So imagine epic like, I'm just my overall goal when I go and talk to my stakeholder, if I'm the product owner, and they say that they want to go ahead and have their sales process automated, right? So the sales process automation is so very high level. So that is actually my epic. And when I start going and discussing and grooming this particular epic with them, and I try to understand deep more, what do they really mean by sales process automation? What all needs to be taken care there? For example, if they tell me they want to have opportunity management as part of this, they want to have business process automation as part of this, they want to do something with respect to cases as part of this, then each of this becomes my feature. They are a little bit broken down from the epic to a little granular level, but I still need to break them down into more granular levels so that the team can go ahead and work on and go and deliver it, right? So that's when we break each of this feature into multiple smaller user stories. So say, for example, I have my opportunity management feature, and then I go ahead and break them into user stories. I go discuss with the stakeholders. I ask them, what do you really want to do with the opportunity management? How does your cycle work? How do you capture your opportunities? What are the different stages they go through? Do you have approvals for it? How do you convert your opportunities, right? So all these things, as I discuss, I will start putting them down as user stories, and all these goes into a bigger bucket called the product backlog. So it's a container where all my epics, features, and user stories are going to reside in. So again, through this process, what we're trying to do is we're working towards a commitment called the product goal, which is first thing that we need to focus on while we're going ahead and building a product backlog. You don't want to be going and adding the non-important things which are like totally not relevant to the product goal, right? So those are not really important. So we focus on what's important. We really focus on what the product goal is and come up with the product backlog. So moving forward, you keep seeing this word sprint through this reminder part of the diagrams, right? So what does even a sprint mean? So sprints are nothing but a heartbeat of Scrum. It's very important because the ideas are turned into value through sprints. So it's a time-boxed iteration of a continuous development cycle. So these are usually 1 to 4 weeks. Again, it may change based on the programs and the products that the companies want to deliver, but usually it ranges between 1 to 4 weeks. And end of each sprint, what happens is an increment or a multiple increments are created. So these are technically the done products, which are potentially shippable items. So that is when I keep, when you keep reading sprint, put yourselves into what sprint really means. So moving on, let's talk about the first event that we have when we start a sprint, which is a sprint planning. So sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the entire sprint, right? So this plan is created by a collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. So there is product owner, there is the Scrum master, there is the entire team, right? The entire team, the developers, all of them, they are part of the sprint planning. And what we try to do in sprint planning is we should try to address 3 important questions. The first one is, why is a sprint valuable? So this is how we derive at what our sprint goal is. So you may have, say, around 300, 400 user stories in your product backlog bucket. So your product owner might have already prioritized it and would have told you, hey, this is my first priority, this is my second, third, and so on. So how do we arrive at a sprint goal? So we work together collectively as a team to arrive at the sprint goal. What are we going to take for each sprint? How are we going to deliver it, right? So the first question, why is a sprint valuable, is very important because this is how we arrive at the sprint goal. And the second most important question is, what can be done the sprint? So what happens is the developers select the items to include in the current sprint. So based on, you would have already done a round of sizing of your stories while you're grooming your backlog with your product owner. So you would have gone ahead and said, hey, this is a small story, this is a medium story or a large story, or you would have given story points, right? So now when you're actually working on the sprint planning, you already know how big or small a user story is. So you would start selecting the items that you want to include as a part of your sprint. There comes a third important question. How will the chosen work get done? So you've already said, this is my sprint goal. You've already decided these are the items that are going to be as part of my current sprint. And how are you going to achieve it? That is the third most important thing. So this is actually achieved by developers planning the work necessary for each of this product backlog item, right? So you know that you start breaking them down into tasks. So you say, like, for example, you want to just create a field on a particular layout for a user story. So what you go ahead and do is, okay, I need to create this field, then which all page layouts I may have to put it, and then what is my field type? Am I having integration? So all that different things you would have understood by when you were grooming the user story. So now you have to break them down into tasks so you exactly know how much work it's going to take for you to complete this work in the sprint. So that's all about sprint planning meeting. So we now have a sprint backlog, meaning we have a committed user stories to be delivered as part of the sprint. And this is where the commitment sprint goal comes into play. So overall, we had a product goal. Now, when we have done the sprint planning, we have a sprint goal. So we had like 300 product backlog items. Now we say, based on whatever discussions we have had, I'm going to do the top 20 stories for this particular sprint. So that becomes my sprint goal. So what do we do after we agree upon a sprint goal, right? We start working on the items. So for this, we do have something called as a daily scrum or a daily stand-up. The main purpose of this is to inspect the progress towards a sprint goal and to produce actionable plan for the next 24 hours. So these are meetings typically happens for 15 minutes every day. So it is by the development team for the development team. It's okay if your product owner is not there. It's mainly for the development team. And one thing very important, and it's a strong misconception around in Scrum, is that people treat daily Scrum as a status meeting, and you should not. It's not your, again, I want to reiterate, we are not order takers. You're not just reporting your status to somebody, right? So daily Scrum helps promote self-managing team, which is again the heart of agility and Scrum. So the team determines how to create the done increment. So they've already committed to the sprint goal. So they now are going to work towards it. So they own the Scrum sprint backlog, right? So the aim is to inspect and adapt the sprint backlog together as a team. So the daily stand-up will improve communication, transparency. If you have any impediments, try to identify that and try to address them, and it will help promote quick decision making. So instead of waiting for the next daily stand-up meeting, in case you find an impediment through the middle of your day, please do not wait. Go ahead and talk to your Scrum Master or anybody who can help you with that and get the impediment sorted out. So these are just the structures which are helpful for the Scrum engagement to be successful, right? So it technically, but doesn't mean that you have to only wait for the daily stand-up to say, hey, I have an impediment. I want to have a risk in this particular deliverable. I need some help. Sprints are shorter duration. So the earlier you go, the earlier you fix, the safer you are with respect to your deliverable. So even if you're through the middle of the day, you had a morning 8 o'clock daily stand up, but you're around 2 p.m. you find out there's an impediment, do not wait for the next day. If you're able to talk to somebody on it, go ahead and talk and don't wait for the next meeting. So moving on, the next one is a sprint review. So now we have come through a long way, right? So we had a product backlog, we had a sprint backlog, we have done some work. Now it's the time to showcase our work. So the sprint review is for that. It's to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. So the Scrum team will present the result of their work to the key stakeholders and progress towards the product goal. This is the time for us to showcase or demonstrate the work we have done. And after that, once your sprint review is complete, you're almost at the near end of your sprint, right? So everything is done. Your stakeholder tells you whether he or she is happy with the user story demonstration or not. If there is any feedback, they're going to give you, you just put it in the product backlog. If there are huge changes, if they are very minor and you're able to take it up in the sprint, you go ahead and take it up. So it's all a group decision, right? So, but almost at the near end of the sprint, your sprint review is done. And I want to take a pause here and also reiterate another thing. Though the sprint review is mostly happens at the end of the sprint, but some of the mature Scrum team, Agile teams, what they do is they go ahead and demonstrate user stories as and when they are built. Typically, like our kitchen renovation example, right? So once I have once someone has built my kitchen cooktop and the chimney, they can come ahead and show me, hey, this is how your cooktop and chimney looks like. They don't have to wait for the near end of the sprint to show me that. So I'm able to give feedback and they're able to incorporate it faster. So go ahead and decide if you feel there is a function that is built already and it's really ready for demonstration, you can go ahead and show it to your product owner or your stakeholder based on their availability and how your setup is. And after that, we come to the real end of the sprint, right? So we do something called as a sprint retrospective. So the purpose of the sprint retrospective is to plan ways to increase the quality and effectiveness as a team, right? So the Scrum team will inspect how the last sprint went with regards to individuals, tools, process, interactions, definition of done. So basically we try to discuss what went well, what could have gone better, and how did we solve or did not solve a problem that we faced. So each of us contribute to this. So the beauty of all these events through the sprint is not a single person is not contributing, right? Everyone is contributing. Everybody's idea is valued. Everyone's idea is shared there. Everyone is respected. So we are trying to get all the good ideas and learnings and improve as a team. So it's very important that each of us contribute towards the sprint retrospective as well. So while our sprint is getting done and our product is being delivered, so through the increment, we are committing to something called as a definition of done, which I'm going to cover shortly what it technically means. But to give you a very short brief of it, it is a set of guidelines to say my story is done if so and so conditions are satisfied. So that is the commitment that we try to look at while we are delivering your sprint increment. So I had talked pretty much a few times about definition of done. It's time to talk a little bit more detail about it. So like I mentioned, definition of done is a set of guidelines which will dictate everything a team is required to do before they can call their work truly done. And so what happens is this is across a program, or this is across feature teams or programs or projects, right? So there is always, again, a misconception between acceptance criteria and definition of done. How it differs is acceptance criteria are something very specific to your story. Those are testable, right? So you try to say that my story, I'll call the story accepted if all these are tested and they all come to be passed and true. Whereas definition of done is more broader. It is across programs, it's across the product teams. So these are typical examples which could be part of your definition of done. You might not see all, but most likely you're likely to see most of this in place. Things like acceptance criteria met, and things like peer reviewed. So basically, all your whatever you've built in Salesforce is somebody is reviewing it, your lead or someone is reviewing it. Again, this depends. Some programs have a large customizations, and what might be needed is you need all of your work to be reviewed. If you're writing a lot of code, then you need to ensure your code coverage is greater than or equal to 85%, or further standards set by your customer. All your stories are tested and passed. If there are integrations, you ensure that you fully test the integration and ensure it works fine. Because what happens if you don't have this as a definition of done? People go and build things, we deliver it, we have not tested the integrations as part of the stories or as part of the program. So then while we are in production, we realize that our integrations are broken, they're not working as expected. So these are important to include as definition of done based on your program and how it is structured, right? You ensure all the defects that are coming as part of your testing, they are fixed, retested, and closed. And your user story demo to the product owner is complete and approved. Again, like I mentioned, these are just examples of definition of done. Again, it could change based on the program. Now we are at the crux of our session, where we are going to talk about when Salesforce met Agile. Did any of you know when Salesforce actually met Agile? Imagine us heading to a Dreamforce and there are no keynotes, no new product announcement, no innovation features available for the next year. So this almost happened to Salesforce in 2006, but they dodged that scenario by implementing a new workflow that changed the way they developed and delivered products. So by 2006, Salesforce as a company had experienced phenomenal growth. They had more customers, more products, more revenue. They were a bigger company compared to 1999 when they actually started. Any growth doesn't come pain-free, right? So things were not easier anymore for them, and there was slowdown in innovation, scaling communication, collaboration, and management, all while they were trying to meet the release dates became really challenging for Salesforce. That is when they took the risk and reinvented a way of delivering solution by adopting agile principles and practices. Most of the work Salesforce does is innovation based, and we have been witnessing this all these years. And the final outcome is always not known upfront. It's completely innovation based, and agile works like a charm for most of these. While most of the Salesforce teams are on agile, there are still some teams which are work on waterfall, simply because their outcomes are very clear and they are known upfront. The work is predictable, so there's no reason to move them to agile, right? So that's why I said there is no one size fits all. You need to choose whether you need waterfall or whether you need to agile based on how all your conditions and parameters work. So when Salesforce adopted Agile, what they started doing was 150 people were organized into small cross-functional teams, and they started working in short iteration. So such a beautiful story I learned a few years back, and it's pretty inspiring what a journey Salesforce has had through this time. Now that done, let's get into our important piece of our session. How do we write good user stories, right? So though this is very important for the product owner because the product owner is going to write the story, this is equally important for the entire developer team because you also need to know what a good story is. So there is something called as an invest criteria. You would have kept hearing this through, if you're into Agile and Scrum, you heard about user story writing. So a good user story fits into this criteria. So it invest, I means independent, I stands for that, which means the story should be independent as far as possible so that they can be delivered separately. So what it means is don't have stories which are have too many dependencies. What it could potentially mean is it's not of value to the customer quickly, right? So unless the dependencies are done, you cannot make the story really valuable to the customer, and you can't deliver this quickly. So keep them as independent as possible. And negotiable. What negotiable means is stories should be discussable further. So there should always be a room for negotiation. So people should be able to debate on the story, understand the story, discuss it further, understand the nuances, and negotiate on the story, even if it's really needed or not. We stands for valuable. So valuable means this story or whatever user story or feature or epic, whatever you create, right? It should add value to the customer. If it doesn't add value to the customer, you should not have it as part of the product backlog, because end of the day, we are trying to make product backlog items valuable to the customer. E stands for estimable. What this means is user stories should be understandable enough so that the team can break them down into tasks and have them estimated. S stands for small. So why do we keep saying that keep smaller stories? So we want to deliver items as soon as possible with some value, right? With some business value to the customer. So they don't have to wait long to start using the application. So when you keep it small, it's easier and faster to deliver. So don't keep stories too big. If they're too big, break them logically into smaller stories wherever possible. Finally, the T in the invest stands for testable, which again means the user story can be tested against the acceptance criteria. Now, these are the three main pieces of a user story. A user story has a summary, which is technically your user story or your feature name. I've given user story or feature name because this is applicable whether you're writing a story or a feature, right? Both of them have a summary. And then there is a description, which is your value statement. You actually tell what the story is in your description. And then there is acceptance criteria, which is the set of conditions to be fulfilled. So let's look at them in detail now. So summary is a crisp statement. You're not going to give elaborate description in your summary. You try to keep it as crisp as possible. So it should just summarize what your story is about. And I've given a tip here. So this was useful for me, could be useful for many of you. One tip is when you have a lot of stories and you have a lot of features about it and more epics about it. So an easier way to understand where this broadly fits quickly is to keep a feature name shortened. For instance, if mine is about business process automation, I can just say process automation as my feature name. And then I can put my story summary, like ability to search products by product family. All right. So I just search product by product family becomes my summary. The next main thing is a description, right? So this is your value statement. Description has three essential parts, which is very important. So we try to say, as a user, which is your persona, I want to, what action you're going to do so that what is the benefit you're achieving out of this. For instance, as a sales representative, I'm not going to write it as a Salesforce user. As a Salesforce user could mean anything to anybody. It could be a marketing user, it could be a sales user, it could be a sales rep, it could be a sales manager and whatnot, right? So clearly mention what user this story is meant for. So like as a sales representative, I want the ability to search for products by product family, which is my action because I'm trying to search for a product by product family, so that what is the benefit I get? So that I am able to retrieve my products quickly without going through a bunch of them, right? So if I have a 50,000 products, I don't want to be strolling through each to go and add products to my cart. I want to retrieve them quickly. So this is what my story is about. So this value statement comes into description. Keep your value statement simple and concise. Focus only on what is important. Anything that is not relevant to the story, or it's relevant to another story, or leading to something else, do not put it in the story. Only keep relevant information. The third part, which is very important again, is acceptance criteria, because only if this set of conditions are fulfilled, your story is going to be accepted by your product owner and the end stakeholder. So acceptance criteria, whatever you put in here, should be testable statements. So again, a tip here, have only around 3 to 5 maximum acceptance criteria in a story, because if you have more, it could potentially mean your story is getting bigger. You may want to break them. Acceptance criteria has 3 parts, like how description had 3 parts. Here we would talk about given, an initial condition basically, when, which is the action, and then the result. For example, the same example, given the that the logged in user is a sales representative, so that's your condition, that the logged in user is a sales rep. Then the action comes when he or she tries to search on products by product family. That's your action. Then what is the result? Then the system should retrieve all products belonging to the product family and show it to the user. So that could be your acceptance criteria. So for this story, you can have several acceptance criteria, right? So you might have different product families. So you could put that. If there are more roles you want to add this to, all that can be part of it. So your acceptance criteria becomes a little bigger. So that is what acceptance criteria is all about. So now let's see these scenarios in action. So I want you to tell me, what are the key details would you include in description of the user story if your story is about new field? So go ahead and tell me as a team, if a story is about creating a new field. So what are the things that you will expect to be part of a user story? Go ahead and pop it in the chat. Again, there are no right and wrong answers. It could change based on the situations, but go ahead and start keying in the chat. So your user story is about new field. What would you want to see in the user story? Or if you are a product owner, what would you capture in the user story? Awesome. Field name, type, visibility, FLS, field type, which page, only admin can add a field. Okay. What object, who needs it, personas using the fields. Anything more? Awesome. So these are great inputs, right? So when you add a new field, if the user story is going to talk about adding a new field, then you might typically want a field label, what it should be called, the field type, whether it's going to be pick list, it's going to be multi-select, or it's just going to be a text field or formula field, whatever. You want to know the field position. You want to know where you want to put it in the page layout and which page layout or screen these should be displayed at. And you'd also like to know whether the field is required, whether this field is read-only, it should be editable, the FL is part of it. And if your data comes from another system or the data flows to another system, then you may want to capture that as well, which will potentially become another story, because all these questions come up while you're grooming the story with your product owner, right? So you keep asking these questions. If a story initially comes just with 2 lines that, as a sales representative, I want the ability to do so and so, so that I get this benefit, then you start asking these questions as developers, right? And you start ensuring all these are captured as notes in your user story, right? So brilliant. Thank you so much for answering this. So let's look at another scenario. What would you look for if your story is about a business process or a workflow in Salesforce? Go ahead and let me know if your user story is about a business process or a workflow. What are the things that you would look for in the story? Awesome. Triggering condition. Perfect. Filter criteria and outcome. Brilliant. Which object, criteria, action type? What is the expected outcome? That is great. Anything more you might look for in a business process or a workflow type of a story? Who should receive this information? Good. Yeah, you're all doing great. You're all giving me the best perfect answers that I can ask for. So yes, just to summarize, we might look for a success pattern, we might look for a failure pattern, we will look for any exceptions, and if there are any exceptions, how do we handle those exceptions? And like you all mentioned, what triggers the flow? What are the actions needed? And remember, if it's like a bigger flow, ensure you're breaking them into smaller stories. Now let's look at our last scenario. What would you look for if your user story is about an approval process? Go ahead and key in your answers in the chat window. This is a story about a Salesforce, which requires a Salesforce approval process. When and to whom? Validation met, criteria met, who need to approve? The approvers, yes. Who can summon the record on which object? Approval steps, final rejection action, criteria approvers who can submit the record. Brilliant. Again, just to summarize, we would look for all the scenarios that could trigger the approval process, how it is expected to work, and the approvers, if there are multiple levels of approval, all that included, how they are notified, and if there's an SLA for approval, and do we need auto approval or things like that. Again, so these are typically what we would work during the grooming itself. So initially, when the product owner comes to you with the product backlog and starts explaining the product backlog items, what you need to ask for is all these different questions, because the user story is written from a user's perspective. So it's not a technical solution. So it's a bad story if someone goes and write, I, as a sales representative, I need to go click a button so that I can retrieve products with my product family. You're not trying to solution it. It's very important to ensure the story just reflects what end user wants, right? So even if a stakeholder is tech savvy and tells you, hey, I need a button, don't go ahead and say it's a button. That's for the technical team to decide, which is the best possible approach to achieve this particular story. So it's a bad story if you start going ahead and solutioning in the user story itself. That comes later, because you need to consider a lot of factors. You cannot just decide based on that one particular story about your solution. There's a big picture to it, right? It needs to fit the big picture. You cannot break something that is already built. So ensure whenever you write a user story, it reflects from a user standpoint, and it reflects the business value, and ensure there is no technical solution that is being associated while you are defining the story itself. And while you're grooming the user story, as developers, we all need to ensure, like whatever we discuss now, right? When we create a new field or a workflow or an approval process, when you are getting there, when you know that this is the path we are going to take, ensure that you try to have all the possible answers that you might need, so that you don't waste time going back and forth, on the same user story. You have enough information to build and deliver the story. Thank you all for participating in this. I am going to move forward and give you an example of a user story. So here's a summary. Again, like I mentioned, I've used my own tip here. I've given the feature name, which is a sales process, in the square brackets. And then my summary is capture regions on opportunity. If you look here, I'm not telling how do you want to capture. I'm just saying capture regions on opportunities. I'm not here to solution this. So description, which is again the crux of the story. As what user? As a sales representative, I want what action to be performed? The ability to capture the region of my opportunities, so that I can report by region. So this is all I want from a user perspective. If I am a sales rep, I want to be able to capture region on my opportunities. I want to be able to report on them. This is what I'm trying to achieve here. And I've also given region here. Like if I'm a product owner, I would have asked the stakeholders, what are all the regions that you want to capture? What all regions your opportunities fall under? So if they tell me EMEA, North America, LATAM, and APAC, so I'm going to put all of these here, right? So when I go to the acceptance criteria as a product owner, I need to make these testable, right? Each of the acceptance criteria should be tested and there should be an associated pass or fail. So if you look here, I've tried to cover a few scenarios. So given that I'm the logged in user, I'm a sales rep. When I view my opportunities, I should be able to see the region to which the opportunity belongs to. So we're talking about viewing opportunities. In my next acceptance criteria, we are talking about as a sales rep, what do I see when I edit my opportunities? I should be able to update the region. So we are trying to talk about that scenario as well. And finally, we did talk about reporting in the description, right? So here I'm saying, given that I'm a sales rep, when I run my opportunity report, and again, here an assumption is I just have one report, I should be able to filter and report based on the opportunity region. So these are my acceptance criteria. So each of these criteria can be tested, and any of you can come and tell me whether this is a pass or fail very clearly. There is no ambiguity here, right? So again, this is a very simple example of writing a user story. It could change based on the programs that you're working in, but as long as you remember the basics and the crux of what it should be in the user story and what should be not, we should be good here. So moving on, let's talk about user story prioritization, right? So now as a product owner, I have all the user stories built. I mean, I'm not having it built upfront, but this is an ongoing process. I keep adding product backlog items to my product backlog, right? So say for example, I've had my initial meetings with my stakeholders and I have already 300 user stories built. Now I need to know which is high priority, which is low priority, which is medium, so that the team can go and work on it, because it's not possible to groom all the 300 upfront and start working on all of them, right? We all have limited capacity. So how do we do prioritization of stories? So this is mostly done by the product owner along with the stakeholders, but it's very important for all of us to know how all this works in the big picture. So what happens is each of the product backlog item, the PBI, is placed into 4 buckets. There's something called as a Moscow analysis, which means your story either fits into a must have, should have, could have, or won't have. So what does this mean, right? When I say must have, it means this story or a feature, for instance, is absolutely essential, right? It has high business value. It's a non-negotiable item for the business, and it's very critical for the success. When I say should have, what it means is this particular product backlog item is very important, but not absolutely essential. It's not a must have, but it's really important. And it's of high priority, right? What does could have means? In simple terms, it's a nice to have item, right? So this particular item has a value and it is desirable, but it's okay if I don't have it delivered now, I'm okay to wait for next release. And what does won't have? Won't have means it's not so important at all, right? I can totally not have it for this release. It's absolutely fine. I'm okay to take it up in the next release. So you don't have to give priority to this for the current release. So how does a product owner along with the stakeholder arrive at this prioritization? We look at a few things, right? So one is the business value, which is the primary thing. So is this particular product backlog item very valuable to my business? So how much value it's going to add to the business, right? So if the higher the value, the more the priority most likely to be. Then we look at dependencies. What is the relationship this particular story has along with, with other product backlog items? So is it dependent on something? Does this story need to go before something else can be built? So that covers dependency. So that is, again, if something needs to be built before something else of high value needs to be built, this story still is high value because I need this for my other high value story. The next one is a solution approach. So when I say solution approach, what I mean here is you're trying to look at the prerequisites or dependencies that should be taken care of. For instance, imagine this is a new Salesforce implementation, right? Maybe for the business, opportunity management or lead management is one of the top 2 priorities, but this is the new implementation, right? So we need org setup to be done. We need to know who the users are, what the hierarchy is, how the org is set up, right? So the basic setup needs to be done. So that becomes prerequisite or dependency for delivering a high value business item. So this again is considered while I'm prioritizing. So I will let my stakeholders know, I know this is very valuable for you. I know you need to capture opportunities and leads. It's utmost priority for you. But for the long-term benefit of the program, we need to ensure we spend enough time and effort for coming up with the org setup. So that is also considered while I prioritize my product backlog item, right? And finally, it is the risk. If there are any risks involved, if my items are dependent on too many other teams, like for instance, we are working on a heavy integration program and my timeline or my prioritization is dependent on someone else because I want an other integration piece to be done, like a Marketo or an SAP or an ERP to be available and their team to be available for me to do something, then that risk is also considered while I prioritize my user story. So moving on, let's quickly look at how do we estimate user stories, right? Smita or Mira, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a yellow line drawn on the screen. I'm not sure if it can be removed.
So maybe if while you're sharing the screen, you might see an option to clear annotations. If you can't see it, I'd say let's just move on. It's not
Okay, no worries.
look at
No,
that.
yeah, I didn't do it. I'm not sure how it came up. I'm not saying clear annotate. So, no, that's fine. No worries at all. So moving on, we look at user story estimation, right? So how do we estimate user story? Again, there is no one size fit all. I know a lot of companies who work without doing story estimation at all, and many who do story point estimation. So when I say estimation here, I'm talking about estimating the user stories, not your tasks. They are two different items, right? So user stories are estimated using user story points. And there's something called relative sizing, right? So you have a base story, which you have already sized. Say, for example, changing a field label on a page layout, standalone page layout of Salesforce. So it's one of a very small user story, right? So you keep them as your base story and you start relatively sizing your other story, thinking, how complex is my current story in relation to my base story? When I say complexity, you think about the functional complexity, how complex functionally or technically it is to achieve this particular story. Then the most important thing, again, a large misconception in the agile world is, how do we not consider time and how do we consider magnitude of work while we size, right? So when I say magnitude of work, I mean effort. And it's very important because we try to see how big or small an effort is to come up with the story, right? So to build a particular story, you are saying this is a small effort story, it's a medium effort story, it's a large effort story. And why you should not consider time is very important to know, because a lot of us by default start, every time we see a story and we size, we're like, hey, we need 8 hours for this. Hey, we need 10 hours for this. And I'll tell you why you should not do that. While we are estimating the story, we are actually in the grooming phase, right? Your product owner is telling you, and you've got enough information about the story. You're trying to say whether it's small, medium, large, or if you're giving story points using the Fibonacci series, then you say it's 1, 2, 3, 5, and so on, right? The reason you should not consider time is that, imagine like I'm a junior developer, right? And say Mira is a senior developer. So for Mira, a story can be achieved like in half an hour. She's super efficient. She is highly skilled in this work. She had been doing this day in and day out. If she picks this story, this get done in half an hour. Like, I'm a junior developer. I don't have that much of a skill set in developing Salesforce application. So I might actually take 4 hours. So it's very different for different people, right? So we don't know whether Mira or Smita or Parvati or me, who is going to take the story. So we do not consider time for this reason when you do story point estimation. Only think about the magnitude of work, how big an effort a particular story is going to be. And moving on, we again look at risks, dependencies, and uncertainties. Like I mentioned earlier, if this story is dependent on building another story, if another story needs to be built so that I can pick my story, that dependency should be considered while you're arriving at the story points. And also, if there are any risks involved, if you have an integration item, you need to get a data from some other system so that you're able to build this thing in Salesforce. So then you need to include and involve that particular risk, and there is an uncertainty involved, because if they do not certainly give you that data, you are stuck with this user story. You may not be able to build this and deliver at the set time. So consider all this while you estimate the story and say whether it's small, medium, or large. Something that is standalone Salesforce, like if you're just changing a field label in Salesforce page, it's very small, right? It's small and an effort. If, for example, there's a medium effort story, meaning if there's a story where you're exchanging data with another application, it could be larger than that, right? So you try to do this relative sizing. And like I mentioned, the estimation value, different companies uses this differently. Some of them do t-shirt sizing at the very, very primitive stage. So they start saying this is extra small, this is medium, this is large. And a lot of companies use Fibonacci, right? So you estimate it using story points. You say that your extra small is 1, your small is 2, your 3 is medium, and so on and so forth. Here are some quick tips for you while you do story point estimation, because you're all going to be doing this and it's very important for all of us to be successful. So you understand the user story fully. This is very, very important, right? So if you have questions, please ask. Do not hesitate to ask questions, because you don't want to waste your time and effort building something that doesn't fit your product goal. So ensure you understand the user story fully. Ask your product owner for all the clarifications. If your product owner does not know, he or she would go ahead, confirm it with the stakeholder and get back to you. Unless you have all the clarifications, you're not going to pick the user story. So ask all the stories, all the questions you need for the story so that you understand it clearly. Then you go ahead and identify a base story, because you are doing a relative sizing, right? Try to see from your past experience in your programs if you have already delivered a small user story, which you know for certain, you've done this work. So you know this is really, really a small story. So keep that as your base story and start sizing your other stories in relation to this, right? So relatively size your other stories in your product backlog to this particular base story. It is also very important to reach consensus among team. Not even once have I been in a scenario where everyone says it is a 2-story point or a 3-story point. There's always, like, some people tell it's 2, some people say it is 3. So there is no right or wrong answer. Do not shy away or do not think, oh, my friend or my teammate said 3, so let me say 3, because it could be different for people. So start talking about it, discuss and come to a consensus. If someone says, you say there's a 2-story point and someone says it's a 5-story point, let the 5-story point, the person who said that, explain to you why the person feels there is so much complexity involved. So while you discuss this, while you be transparent and be open to this kind of discussion, all of us in the team are able to arrive at consensus quickly, because we understand sometimes we might have left something because our skill set doesn't cover it, or we have not thought in that particular angle, but someone else had looked at it and have that information for us. So it's very important that you understand the story fully and also discuss and come to a consensus while arriving at a story point. Do not just agree because someone else said. Put down your points very clearly, because tomorrow you might pick that story and you might be feeling like, oh my God, I should have said this is 5-story point, which I said earlier. I said it is 2, but it's totally not 2 now. This is a big effort one. If a story is bigger, like if it comes to a scenario where, again, this is my recommendation, if it becomes about 8 user story points, please break them down into smaller stories. Tell your product owner this is big, or as a product owner, if a product owner knows this is an 8-story point or higher, he or she should try to break them into smaller chunks so it's easier to deliver and faster to give it to your business for some value, right? So here is a typical example that I've tried to show in relation to sizing your stories. Like I mentioned, if you have a field label change, which is a standalone Salesforce, you just have to change the label name. Say, for example, you have a region, you want to rename it to some other field. You just have to change it on a particular layout, and that becomes my base story, which I've already delivered. So that becomes my smallest. My next story, if for instance, is a field creation one, right? So I need to create a field. This is only in Salesforce. There is no integration involved. I need to create a field. I need to ensure, like you all mentioned the other time, all the parameters like field type, what kind of field it is, what are the FLs involved, where all should I put it, who should see, who should do what, all that thing, right? So this looks to me that it is relatively bigger than the field label change. So I need to size this bigger compared to the field label change, right? So if I call my field label change is small, I'm going to call this my medium. Say, for example, you have another field creation story, but there is a difference here. You have an integration system involved. So you have a field creation, but either the data for this field either comes from a different system or you need to push this data to a different system, right? So then how do you size this? Again, compared to my field label change, this is larger, right? So I'm going to give this a large. And finally, if you have a multi-step approval process, so a story which talks about different approvals, you have multiple levels of approval and you need to incorporate all that, then the magnitude of complexity and the magnitude of work involved is going to be much higher when compared to a field label change standalone in the application, right? So when we size this, we are going to really give it something like an extra large or 8 story points for this. So this is to give you an overview of how user story estimation works. With that, we have really come to the end of this session. So just to summarize, I've discussed quite a bit about when do we use Agile, when do we use Waterfall, and basics of Scrum. We tried to cover a little bit of roles and all the ceremonies, Scrum events that we have as part of the programs. We also talked a little bit about when Salesforce really met Agile, and then the user story sizing, estimation, and prioritization. I'm going to start adding more blogs to salesforcecouple.com in the coming weeks. So if you are interested in reading more about Agile and Salesforce, your go-to place is here. Smitha, over to you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to present the session today. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and pop it in the chat window.
Thank you so much, Sudha, for that wonderful session. I'm sure people definitely now understood like how we can apply Agile and how it should work. Sudha, there are some questions on the chat actually, but because of time constraint, you can go ahead and respond in the chat itself. Meanwhile, we will proceed with Kahoot.
Sure, Mira, sounds good.
Yeah.